The reason is, of course, many different aspects. But as a child, I grew up with a father who was an architect, and a mother, she is a physiotherapist. So every family travel that we went on was actually studying architecture and studying people. Also from my childhood, I sort of had like the aspiration on how can the physical environment of humans in cities actually nudge change, and how does the architectural profession actually liver that societal responsibility. The way that cities are, that's actually more a system than a structure, a system of flows. And since there's so much unpredictability in our everyday lives and in the future, but also looking into history, it's for me interesting to look into processes instead of products. And that aspiration has always been part of sort of my value set, you could say, or where I look into more information and get inspired. My father, he had like a super ear. He couldn't read notes, but he could listen to a music or sit down at the piano and compose, played many different instruments. And that, so I became an architect and my brother became a musician. I'm the firstborn, so I should attend all my piano lessons for 10 years, classical. I even sang in the choir. But I'm not able to read notes as well. I can sort of go step by step and then, play the tune. So I also used a lot of my intuition and sort of making the tunes. And I still play the piano. I have a piano at home. So I still play the piano, but I do it not by notes, but I do it by intuition. And I think as a leader, that is, as I am today, that is also a skill that is very useful because it's about people, it's about building relationships, and it's about daring to use your intuition. Yeah. I don't know if I have like one single event or experience that made me change. But starting with architecture, I was a little bit, opposing to the way my father was an architect. He could draw details, look at how the masonry was sort of fingered together and how every detail was. Where I've been singing my whole life as part of a choir. And I remember that I sat next to my mother because we went to all these concerts. Music was a big part of my childhood and still is to some extent. I remember I saw this conductor that was literally crying while he conducted a big orchestra and a choir. And then I said, wow, I think I was around 8 or 10 years. And I said, well, that's a cool position. So not to be the soloist, but actually to be the conductor. Yeah. You cannot play it for them, but you can actually frame how it can be orchestrated. And that's a little bit like a system. And a city is a living system. So a building is a structure and a city is a system that responds to our demands, our needs, and the dynamics of weather. Our whole studio is hugely inspired by Humboldt. It's hugely inspired by keep reinventing the expressions of nature, but by understanding and learning from studying nature. It's also what nature can bring to people. It can give you moments of awe where you feel connected with something bigger. So it's again getting back to the systems that we are as humans living nature. We are nature, but we tend to forget it because we are not surrounded by it. We use 90% of our time indoor. And that's why it's beautiful to be here in this greenhouse, and have this in the city farm of Vienna. What SLA is trying to do in cities, that is exactly it. So it's, of course, we talk about designing a new type of nature. We are not mimicking nature, but we are designing with the understanding, the research, the knowledge, the experience of what nature can perform and how that value creation can be creating better environments in cities for people. So basically more live-worthy cities. All our work is in the dynamics of weather. Either it's drought, either it's heat, islands in a very paved city, or if it's like in super wet areas. So the whole span of projects or of dynamics of weathers is our everyday environment. And I think the public space has a huge potential, both for limiting loneliness, but also for making our cities resilient, but also to make them feel and function like forests. So like make them aspire this notion of awe, that you are connected, as music can, as all art can do. It's only on a personal level, where nature is more like on a general level. The informal meeting of persons going from their home door to the train station, the metro station, or shopping groceries, going to the library, different kinds of errands in a city. That's where we can make all these interventions that maybe limits loneliness. So it's not out of your comfort, but you can program a city like that, so you actually nudge a little bit. So it's not like sub-optimized. So everything has to go super lean from one point to another, but you actually are on a little bit of an abrasive route where nature is insisting and saying hello, and you maybe listen to a bird, see a butterfly, or say hello to your neighbor because you have to go close by her or him. So working with nature-based design and landscape-led planning, we cannot do that as architects alone or as designers alone. We need to start on the right basis and then make design in all phases, even through maintenance. We make maintenance design because often cities, they design or they maintain under a specific set of rules. But if we are to make our cities more grown and make them more resilient, more nature-based, then we need to shift the paradigms in all levels. So that's why we have some gardeners or even foresters, horticulturists. So they can see, okay, for example, the roundabout project we did in Copenhagen, where we shifted the section of infrastructure, added a lot of nature. Our horticulturist, we had like a problem when we had to plant the whole understory of this forest, urban forest. The pH value of the growth medium, the soil, was not good enough. So we were like, okay, what do we do? Do we change the soil? Super expensive, not very CO2 friendly. And then the horticulturist said, well, why don't we do like in the forest? We simply buy a container of cone shells, shovel it in under the trees, and see how it goes. And after 3 weeks, the soil was matured and had the right pH value to plant the understory. So that's an example of having different disciplines that actually makes the design proposal much more valuable, much more robust, much more, better in many ways. And even cheaper and less CO2. Having that amount of experience and being precise on, we know what it costs. We know what it costs to maintain the spaces that we have already done. So of course it piles up and increases thereby the credibility. One of the advantages of having so many projects that we have, we simply bring clients and end users into our physical design and then make them understand, engage, experience, explore. So that's powerful. So we started by understanding and advocating for our value proposition in everything we do. And that attracts clients. And sometimes we also talk about emotions, saying, well, can you just close your eyes for a minute and feel in your heart what is the right decision? Is it to pave it all, or to include species or different types of trees in this specific neighborhood? Or isn't it true that you spent to a city or to a private developer, spent quite a lot of money on repairing this pavement, or after a storm or a big time of drought, heat islands, all these type of, isn't it true that, and then of course also the shift on the social values. I mean, in Europe and in Denmark specifically, the well-being of our younger generations has really increased by double up over the last 10 years. And that's where we can bring the research and the evidence to argument for growing more and for planting more, because it's not something that we invented, but it's something that we put into the design. And of course, on all levels of society, if you go to the European Union, they have the taxonomy, but also you see in many different cities that people really sort of care about the proximity of nature in their everyday living. And during COVID in Copenhagen, all the urban spaces were completely overpopulated. So it's from both sides, both political-wise. We need to understand that we are in a crisis of biodiversity loss, and we are part of that because we are also a living species. So that is different types of arguments, but that's where we use research, and that's why we invested in biologists, having them to sort of put the right design legend into our design, making the right biotopes, the right setting for what type of species we would like to attract, and then also to monitor our projects over time. One very radical different aspect from our point of view is that our projects start after inauguration. That's when you cut the string, that's where the life starts. That's where we also, if you plant a series of trees, a lot of perennials and grass types, and then 2 days after you have like a huge rain event. Then we are like really, crossing our fingers. Please stay, dear plants. But that's not something that you cannot ensure. You cannot. That's the unpredictable part of our future. But that's really sort of a shift, and that's where I think on the social values of this societal responsibility that we have as an architecture profession, should be much more focused on. It's again to sort of look at infrastructure not as solving one problem at the time, but that infrastructure can actually be manyfold of the value proposition and also the risk minimization of the future dynamics of weather, and also have sort of a flexibility for what we don't know. And that's where we are a little bit out of our comfort as humans. We want to sort of be prepared. We want to risk minimize. We want to know. We want to, calculate all the capacities, etc. But we can't. And we increasingly frequent experience that. So why don't we, again, going back to looking into the public space infrastructure as a system that has like flexibility. So not sort of, you cannot control nature. It has been there far longer than us. And the more we push it, the more it will push back, and it's way more powerful than we are. And I mean, just look at COVID, and just look at, in September, it was the most wet month ever measured in Denmark. We had like cloud burst 2 or 3 times within a month. And I know that you had that in Vienna, also like a severe rain that made huge damages. So again, as architects, to actually understand the equation of what that means financially, that's also an argument. How do we make it more resilient? And to just do pipes underneath infrastructure, that's a certain capacity. And how do you then make them like 300% more than the capacity from the last event? It's all predictions, and you cannot predict enough. But if you are more saying, well, the infrastructure should also be the blue and green flow of our city, then it starts to become a space for both the social values, but also the natural value proposition, the ecosystem services, making them thrive. But that will be a new aesthetic. It's not the same. It's not like grasses and a special type of trees that is almost like a, cut out of a way that a tree should look in our minds. But that's definitely an exploration and a change in aesthetics. What really matters for me, and what I try to say in all different types of relations, for a client, for an end user group, internally in our organization, is you should just try and test it and see if we can make like a prototype. Maybe we fail, it doesn't matter, but we get wiser. So in the organization of SLA, we are always a we. There's never an I. We work interdisciplinary, and we really learn from prototyping. And there's a design thinking from IDEO saying that prototyping enables you to fail so you can succeed sooner. So it's for young architects, for the younger part of the profession, I really sort of aspire to go into the craftsmanship, getting your hands in it. Don't stay at your desk. Understand and test, and interest. Be curious about stuff. It's very rare that you can fix everything in your head. I've never tried it.